On the morning of April 8, 1943, the sky over Caen, France, served as a theater of profound miscalculation. Oberleutnant Robert Hermican, an ace of the elite Jagdgeschwader 26, looked through his crystal-clear Focke-Wulf 190 canopy and felt a surge of professional contempt. Below him, the massive silhouettes of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt struggled for altitude, their 7-ton frames appearing as flying milk bottles to the sleek, combat-hardened veterans of the Luftwaffe. At this moment in history, the Germans possessed a monopoly on tactical brilliance, fueled by years of experience in the skies over Poland, Russia, and Britain. To the German pilots, who equated fighter design with nimbleness and aesthetic grace, the corpulent American machine was not a threat. It was a comical industrial error, a lumbering giant that seemed to defy the very laws of aerodynamics. The genesis of this comical machine lay in the uncompromising mind of Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer. Amidst a June 1940 panic, as the Wehrmacht swept through Western Europe, Kartveli ignored the prevailing wisdom of lightweight interceptor design. He envisioned a high-altitude juggernaut built around the most powerful engine available, the 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. This was not a pursuit of elegance, but a commitment to brute force engineering. The XP-47B was designed as a dinosaur with good proportions, a massive platform housing a complex turbo-supercharger system that occupied the entire rear fuselage. To those accustomed to the Spitfire's slim lines, the P-47's wide, barrel-shaped fuselage looked pregnant. Yet every cubic inch was a calculated response to the need for high-altitude power and unyielding structural integrity. Before the P-47 could terrorize the enemy, it nearly broke the men who flew it. Major Hubert Hub Zemke's 56 Fighter Group, training in the harsh conditions of 1942 Connecticut, initially viewed the Thunderbolt as a death trap. The aircraft was so heavy it would ground loop on landing and torque roll with fatal violence on takeoff. Between September 1942 and January 1943, the unit lost 18 pilots to training accidents, more than they would lose in their first several months of combat. Pilots discovered the terrifying phenomenon of compressibility, where the aircraft's incredible weight caused it to dive so fast that control surfaces froze as they approached the sound barrier. It was a machine that demanded a total abandonment of traditional air combat theory. It could not be flown in the classical sense. It had to be aimed like a weapon and managed like a high-pressure industrial boiler. The hidden genius of the Thunderbolt was its performance in the thin, oxygen-deprived air of 27,000 feet and above. While the Luftwaffe's BMW and Daimler-Benz engines relied on mechanical superchargers that gasped for breath at high altitudes, the P-47's turbo supercharger used redirected exhaust gases to maintain sea-level power in the stratosphere. This technical disparity meant that while German fighters became sluggish and unresponsive above 5 miles, the Thunderbolt remained a high-energy beast. Kartveli's design allowed American pilots to operate in a dead zone where the nimble German interceptors were at their weakest. The massive Pratt & Whitney engine provided the energy required to carry not only the pilot and fuel, but also an unprecedented battery of 8.50 caliber machine guns, ensuring that when the Thunderbolt did arrive, it did so with more kinetic energy than any aircraft in history. By April 1943, the stage was set for a transformation of aerial warfare through industrial logic. Each P-47 was a flying magazine, carrying 3,400 rounds of ammunition distributed across its broad wings. Unlike European fighters that carried a mix of light machine guns and low-velocity cannons with limited ammo, the Thunderbolt was standardized for the Browning M2 heavy machine gun. The result was a convergence zone of destruction that could maintain sustained fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in a dogfight. When all 8 guns were synchronized to intersect at 300 yards, they created a wall of lead that delivered 100 projectiles per second. This was the mathematical end state of Kartveli's vision, a machine that used mass and firepower to redefine survival, turning the German pilots' laughter into a haunting silence that would eventually consume the Third Reich skies. On June 26, 1943, the German perception of the flying milk bottle was shattered by a single, miraculous act of survival. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a former farm boy from Oklahoma, flying with the 61st Fighter Squadron, was part of a 48-plane escort mission returning from France. As they cruised near Lazo, they were bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from the elite Jagdgeschwader 26, led by Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland. The attack was a textbook execution of Luftwaffe tactics, diving from the sun with a massive speed advantage. Within seconds, Johnson's P-47 was engulfed in a storm of 20mm cannon shells. His canopy shattered, hydraulic fluid blinded him, and fire erupted behind his instrument panel. To any other aircraft, this would have been the terminal moment, but for the Thunderbolt, it was merely the beginning of a legend that would resonate through the hangars of both warring nations. Wounded by shrapnel in his leg and nose, Johnson attempted to bail out of his flaming wreckage at 27,000 feet. He pulled the release, but the canopy wouldn't budge. A 20mm shell had exploded in the metal track, welding the glass shut. He was trapped in a dying machine that was now a magnet for every German gunner in the vicinity. Despite the oil-slicked windscreen and the violent vibration of a failing engine, the structural integrity of the P-47's massive longerons, the steel backbone of the fuselage, held firm. Johnson managed to level the plane and turn toward the English Channel. He was flying a wreck that should have disintegrated, yet the over-engineered Republic airframe refused to yield to the gravitational and kinetic forces threatening to tear it apart. As Johnson limped toward England at a meager 170 miles per hour, a lone Focke-Wulf 190 maneuvered behind him. The German pilot, seeing the shredded tail and smoke, expected an easy kill. He opened fire, emptying his 20mm cannons into the Thunderbolt's fuselage. The P-47 absorbed the hits, its armored cockpit plate protecting Johnson's back like a medieval shield. Stunned, the German pilot repositioned and fired his remaining 13mm machine guns until he was completely out of ammunition. He then pulled alongside Johnson, staring into the cockpit of the flying Civ in utter disbelief. Seeing a blonde, young face through the shattered glass, the German pilot simply shook his head, gave a respectful salute, and peeled away. He had witnessed a machine that defied the German understanding of aerial mortality. When Johnson finally touched down at Manston, the engine seized the moment the wheels hit the tarmac. As he climbed out of the cockpit, his ground crew stood in stunned silence. They began counting the bullet and cannon holes, but stopped after reaching 200. The aircraft had survived 21 direct 20mm cannon hits. 5 of the 4 main structural supports were severed, and a massive radial engine had swallowed explosive shells that would have vaporized the cooling system of a liquid-cooled fighter like the Bf-109 or the Spitfire. This incident was the turning point for American morale. If a plane could take that much punishment and bring its pilot home, the men of the 56 Fighter Group realized they weren't flying a milk bottle. They were flying an indestructible fortress. Reports of Johnson's survival sent shockwaves through Luftwaffe intelligence. They initially dismissed the claims as American propaganda, believing no single-engine aircraft could survive a full load of 20mm ammunition. However, as more P-47s returned to base with missing tails, shredded wings, and cylinders shot clean off their engines, the German Indiana joke ceased. American pilots began to fly with a new, aggressive confidence. They realized that in the P-47, they could take risks that would be suicidal in any other airframe. This psychological shift, the transition from fearing the machine's weight to trusting its invulnerability, was the foundation upon which the USAF would build its air supremacy over Europe, proving that resilience was just as lethal a weapon as firepower. By late 1943, despite its legendary durability, the P-47 Thunderbolt still faced a critical tactical limitation: its rate of climb. While the turbo supercharger allowed the Jug to dominate the thin air above 25,000 feet, getting to that altitude remained a slow and vulnerable process. At sea level, the early Thunderbolts climbed an anemic 2,200 feet per minute, a figure easily surpassed by the lightweight Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190. German pilots exploited this climb gap, often lurking at medium altitudes and diving on American formations from below, where the heavy P-47 struggled to accelerate upward. To transform the Thunderbolt into a truly universal predator, Republic Aviation needed to find a way to convert the massive 2,000 horsepower output of the double Wasp engine into immediate vertical thrust. The solution came not from a new engine, but from a redesign of the interface between the engine and the air, the propeller. In early 1944, the P-47D-22 variant arrived in England equipped with a Hamilton Standard hydromatic propeller featuring paddle blades with a broader chord and a massive 13-foot diameter. Unlike the narrow blades of earlier versions, these broad surfaces bit into the air with unprecedented efficiency. The impact was immediate and dramatic. The climb rate surged to 3,000 feet per minute at sea level, allowing the Thunderbolt to match or exceed the vertical performance of the Luftwaffe's finest interceptors. This modification effectively closed the final window of German tactical advantage, turning a high-altitude specialist into a versatile interceptor capable of fighting on its own terms at any height. The terrifying reality of this new performance was felt most acutely on October 8, 1943, over Bremen. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most decorated aces with 206 victories, led Jagdgeschwader 1 to intercept a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet. Philipp, flying a Focke-Wulf 190A6, found his aircraft sluggish and unresponsive in the thin atmosphere, his BMW 801 engine struggling for oxygen. Above him, Robert Johnson and the 56 Fighter Group were cruising at 32,000 feet, perfectly powered by their turbo superchargers. In a clinical 30-degree deflection shot, Johnson's battery of 8 guns shredded Philipp's aircraft, which exploded instantly. The death of such a high-ranking veteran sent a chilling message to the Luftwaffe. The Americans no longer just had more planes. They had a technical superiority that made even the most experienced German pilots vulnerable. The introduction of the paddle blade propeller did more than just enhance physics. It added a psychological dimension to the war. As the blade tips reached supersonic speeds during high-power maneuvers, they created a distinctive, deep thundering roar that could be heard miles away on the ground. German troops began to identify the P-47 by sound alone, calling it the Donnerschlag or thunderclap. This acoustic signature became a herald of impending destruction. Unlike the high-pitched scream of the Stuka or the hum of the Spitfire, the P-47's roar felt mechanical, industrial, and inevitable. It was the sound of a machine that didn't just fly through the air, but conquered it through sheer displacement and power, a sonic reminder that the Reich's air defense was failing. With the addition of external drop tanks, the short-legged P-47 of 1943 evolved into a long-range escort by early 1944. Carrying 108-gallon wing tanks, Thunderbolts could now stay with the bombers deep into the German heartland. The Luftwaffe's strategy of waiting for the escorts to turn back before attacking the B-17s collapsed. German pilots now had to run a gauntlet of 8-gun batteries before they could even see their targets. The P-47 escort screen became an impenetrable barrier. Even if a German pilot survived the high-altitude dive of a Thunderbolt, he would find the Americans waiting for him at every altitude level. The sky over Germany was being systematically partitioned, and the Thunderbolt was the surveyor, marking every cubic mile of air as American territory. As the Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Normandy in early 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt underwent its final and perhaps most terrifying transformation. While the P-51 Mustang began to take over the role of high-altitude long-range escort, the Jug was redeployed to lower altitudes for ground attack missions. It was here that the aircraft's extreme structural strength and massive engine became its greatest assets. The transition was a strategic masterstroke. The Thunderbolt proved to be the most rugged ground attack platform of the war, capable of flying through thick curtains of small arms fire and 20 millimeters flak that would have downed any other fighter. The American High Command realized that the P-47 was not just a dogfighter. It was flying artillery, capable of delivering a payload equivalent to a medium bomber with the pinpoint accuracy of a sniper. The hardware of the P-47D-25 and later variants made it a monster of the low-level battlefield. It could carry two 1,000-pound bombs under its wings and a 500-pound bomb under the fuselage, a loadout that matched the early war capacity of the twin-engine Bristol Blenheim. Furthermore, the addition of zero-length rocket stubs allowed the Thunderbolt to carry 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, VARs, each packing the punch of a 105 mm artillery shell. When a squadron of P-47s rolled into a dive toward a German panzer column, they didn't just strafe, they unleashed a literal apocalypse. A 2-second burst from 8 guns, combined with the launch of rockets, meant that a single fighter could neutralize an entire convoy in one pass, leaving behind nothing but burning metal confetti. The psychological impact on the German army was so profound that it manifested as a clinical condition known as Jabo fever. Ground troops, from panzer grenadiers to supply drivers, lived in constant fear of the Jag bomber, Jabo. The mere sound of the P-47's engine would cause entire regiments to abandon their vehicles and dive into ditches. Oberst Hans von Luck, a veteran commander of the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, recounted how his men became physically ill with stress when the Thunderbolts appeared. The P-47s owned the daylight hours so completely that the Wehrmacht was forced to move its supplies and reinforcements exclusively at night. This interdiction of the battlefield crippled German logistics and ensured that Allied troops on the ground faced a dazed and undersupplied enemy. What made the P-47 truly unkillable in the ground attack role was its air-cooled radial engine and massive armor plating. Unlike liquid-cooled engines, where a single bullet through a radiator would cause the engine to seize within minutes, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 could continue to run even with multiple cylinders shot away. P-47s frequently returned to base with entire sections of their wings missing, or with the fuselage shredded by 88 mm flak bursts. The armored protection around the engine and the pilot's cockpit ensured that the man and the machine could survive the meat grinder of low-altitude combat. This survivability meant that experienced pilots lived to fly hundreds of missions, building a level of tactical expertise that the depleted Luftwaffe could never hope to match. The data from a 9th Air Force provides a sobering look at the efficiency of the Thunderbolt as an instrument of destruction. In the months following D-Day, P-47 units claimed the destruction of over 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, and 6,000 armored fighting vehicles. This wasn't just combat. It was the systematic dismantling of a modern industrial army. By April 1945, the Thunderbolt had turned the German interior into a graveyard of burnt steel. The flying milk bottle that German pilots had laughed at 2 years prior had become the primary reason the German army could no longer fuel its tanks or feed its soldiers. The thunder of the P-47 had become the funeral dirge of the Third Reich, proving that industrial logic, when weaponized, is an unstoppable force. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe deployed its miracle weapon, the Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter, in a desperate attempt to reclaim the skies. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, the jet should have rendered the propeller-driven Thunderbolt obsolete. However, American pilots like Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer discovered that the P-47's high-altitude energy and legendary dive speeds could bridge the gap. In November 1944, Meyer's P-47 dove from 28,000 feet, reaching nearly 500 miles per hour to catch an Me-262 in level flight. The concentrated fire of 8 heavy machine guns proved catastrophic for the fragile jet. The German aircraft literally disintegrated under the wall of lead. This era also saw the introduction of the P-47M, a specialized sprint variant with 2,800 horsepower, specifically designed to hunt V-1 flying bombs and jets, proving that the Thunderbolt's airframe could be pushed to the very limits of piston engine physics. The ultimate demonstration of the P-47's role in the war of attrition occurred during Operation Bodenplatte on January 1, 1945. In a surprise dawn attack, 900 German aircraft struck Allied airfields, destroying 22 Thunderbolts at the Metz airfield alone. A captured German pilot mocked Major George Brooking, asking what he thought of the carnage. Brooking's response was a cold reflection of industrial reality. By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots? He was right. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47D-40S were pushed onto the flight line, flown in from massive depots. The Luftwaffe had lost 213 irreplaceable pilots that day. The Americans had lost aluminum and rubber, which were replaced before the smoke had even cleared. This avalanche of steel made German tactical success irrelevant. While dominating Europe, the P-47 was also rewriting history in the Pacific theater. Colonel Neil Kirby and the 348th Fighter Group proved that the Thunderbolt's durability was the perfect antidote to the nimble but fragile Japanese Zero and Oscar. Kirby earned the Medal of Honor by shooting down 6 Japanese planes in a single mission, utilizing high-side passes that the Japanese could not counter. The arrival of the P-47N, with wet wings holding 93 gallons of fuel each, extended the aircraft's range to a staggering 2,350 miles. Japanese Eisaburo Sakai described the Thunderbolt as a monster, noting that his 20mm cannons, which could vaporize a P-40, seemed to have no effect on the Jug. The P-47 became the long-range guardian of the B-29 superfortresses, ensuring that the industrial war reached Japan's doorstep. The most poignant vindication of the P-47 came 40 years after the war at a 1985 reunion in Arizona. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, the former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked about his initial impressions of the American fighter. His recorded response was a haunting confession. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. We said they built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the ones who didn't understand." Galland admitted that upon finally flying a captured P-47, he realized the Americans hadn't tried to build a European-style dueling aircraft. They had built a pilot's machine centered on survivability and firepower. He remarked that once you heard the sound of Roosevelt's piano, the rhythmic thunder of those 8 guns, you knew the war was over. The P-47 Thunderbolt stands today as the quintessential symbol of American industrial philosophy, brute force engineering backed by unlimited resources. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 units, completing 1 aircraft every hour at peak production. With a final tally of 3,752 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air and tens of thousands of ground targets neutralized, its combat record remains unparalleled. The flying milk bottle had transformed into an instrument of annihilation that buried the Luftwaffe under 135 million rounds of ammunition. It was more than a fighter. It was a mechanical manifestation of a nation's resolve. The laughter of the German aces in 1943 was silenced by the realization that in a total war, the machine that can take the most punishment and deliver the most fire will always own the sky.